Hello and welcome to Legendarium Green Team, where we talk about speculative fiction and other stuff. I am your host, Huron Fan, and I'm joined today by Seeker.
Hi.
And joined at the hip, Lord Ash.
Hi.
Today we'll be talking about, I don't know, a little book. You've probably never heard of it. It's pretty obscure. The Odyssey. Do you guys did you ever hear this book before reading it for the podcast?
I just had a minor bit of fantasy there.
Just a minor bit?
Yeah,
I think it was on The Simpsons.
Matt Groening decided that he would write through the character of the patriarch of The Simpsons, I think, and then got that translated into ancient Greek and then back translated. Like Backstroke of the West, if anybody is familiar with that, the translation into Chinese of episode 3 of Star Wars, which got translated back in.
Okay, that must be interesting.
Yeah, so this is maybe like a little homage to that.
Well, I heard some big Hollywood producer was making a movie of this book, and so I had to read it. Maybe we could talk about the adaptation later.
Yeah, have you seen it? I haven't.
I've seen it
I
twice
haven't
already.
either.
Twice?
Yeah.
Is it any good?
Yes.
Nice. I mean, it's probably also worth talking about the translation we chose, or at least mentioning.
Yes, that's important. The translation we chose, all jokes aside, was Emily Wilson's, which came out. Do you remember when it came out? I want to say it came out less than 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago.
It is pretty recent. I look it up. It was copyrighted 2018.
Yeah, so about 8 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
I had read this before, and I'd also read her Iliad translation, and I liked it. And then with the coming of the Christopher Nolan adaptation, I thought it would be a good episode to talk about. It's a bit different from some of the other translations. So the notable is she's the first professional published female translator of Homer. And she decided to do it in line by line, so matching the amount of lines as the original poem. And she did it in iambic pentameter. We could talk about the pros and cons and of that later. But shall we get into anything else I should talk about before we get into it?
My only anything about the translation was that her 3-hour-long personal commentary should probably have been best left to the end instead of the beginning. I not because I feel it's worth skipping, but I felt like she was trying to ensure that the reader interpreted events the way she thinks they should be interpreted, and that's what kind of bugged me. It's like I would have liked to have read it, got my own, and then heard her view on it.
It seems a lot of books, especially ones that are like really famous, they put forewords that kind of explain a lot of things, assuming that the reader is already familiar with the text itself at the beginning instead of the end. So for new readers, you're just like, oh, I probably shouldn't be reading this.
Yeah,
I think I agree.
I hadn't read it in over 20 years.
I really like the foreword.
It was good. I'm not dissing the foreword. I just, as someone who hadn't read the Odyssey in over 20 years, it felt like I was being spoon-fed an interpretation, And I was like, well, couldn't this have been at the end?
That's fair.
Yeah, I think by convention these are at the beginning. I would agree that at the end would make a lot more sense. It's not something it's not a problem specifically with this, but no, I agree. Like I didn't read the whole thing. At some point I was just like, I've screw this. I'm just gonna do this myself. Yeah, like she definitely had an interpretation that she wanted the reader to know about, and I think it's fair for the author to do that. But yeah, like if you're picking up the Odyssey for the first time, and this is a translation that I think is explicitly meant for people who are picking it up for the first time, then I think there should have been like something at the beginning to say, okay, read the book, read the story first, and then come back to this, so that I'm not biasing you with my opinions.
That would have been nice.
I would like I said earlier, I would like to. How many different versions of the Odyssey have you read?
Me?
Both of you.
Two.
Yeah.
So this is actually also my second. I never read my introduction to the Odyssey was reading in the 4th grade, like a version of it for, I think, young adults is probably fair to say. So it was like 200 or so pages and written in prose. and then I had previously accumulated versions but never gotten through them until now. So I was familiar with the story, and the version I read in 4th grade, I think it probably still holds up. It's the structured in more traditional way. It just kind of like starts with Odysseus leaving Troy and then making his way back home in a linear way, rather than the kind of in media res that this one starts with. But the emotional pathos is there. It's very accessible to kids, which I was at the time, and like it really made a strong impression on me, in kind of a different way. It was more like a swashbuckling adventure, and then this one was like grim. All my friends are dead. I want to go home. Why won't
Yeah,
my
I think
name
it's
let me go home?
funny that the parts of the Odyssey that kind of stick around in the public consciousness are the 3 chapters of him retelling his tale.
Yeah,
Even though that's a very small part of the book. It's a little understandable because I guess it's a little easier. And yeah, I think prose is a perfectly fine version to experience it for the first time, but this is seen and lauded as a very approachable and accessible version of the Odyssey, and I think
Yeah.
she succeeded at that.
Yeah, and I found it very easy to read. And I'm an audiobook only, so I found the person reading it to be very easy to listen to and follow.
Um, I think, and yeah, I think this is a good version for people who are experiencing it for the first time if they don't want to go for prose. And because it is a poem, you probably want to read a version. So if I were to, out of all the versions I've read this and a lot more. I think when I was in the '90s, I probably read what's his name, Fagles, and I've read Fitzgerald. Um, and this one I think is definitely the easiest of all of those I read, and best for maybe somebody experiencing it for the first time. So I guess kudos to her for doing that well.
I I think that yeah. So I agree. She succeeds in it being an approachable text. There is a criticism I have regarding how contemporaneous some of the language is. Like there are specific turns of phrase that she uses throughout the book, that they're kind of pushing it a bit too far with the modern idioms, and they kind of stick out. I think she would have done well to just kind of remove those. And for the most part, it's just kind of like clear language that you can follow easily, and is sometimes approaches beauty, I think, and is nice to listen to. And I was reading it out loud to my daughter for at least a couple of the books. But yeah, sometimes it can veer into the clunky.
I'm so glad you brought this up because I probably mentioned already. This is my second time through the book. The first time I quite enjoyed it, and I also read it aloud. And you're right; it's actually it has a wonderful rhythm to it because I mean iambic pentameter.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fun read and it's good on the ears. But really, it's this read through that some of the very plain language, and I wouldn't say any anachronisms that really bother me. Mostly just the plain language really hindered my enjoyment, I would say.
Hmm.
I would prefer something like Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald is known for his more poetic style. It's very epic. It's very old. It reads as if something had come from the past and you're reading it now, and it's kind of what you think of when you hear an ancient epic tale. Not that this is bad, and of course they're going for different things, but I do think you definitely lose that part of the reading. Do we want to go into maybe the pros and cons of different translations? Not in specifics, but maybe what a good translation can mean to
I
you.
think it
And
Yeah, I think it depends on the audience. While you were talking about the translations, I just had a flashback because my boys, they speak modern English perfect, but they grew up in Mexico. And we were discussing biblical texts because we didn't raise them religious at all. And they were starting to ask some questions. They're in their 20s now. And I sent them some verses, and I default to King James because that's what I was raised with. And then my son is like, "What does thou mean?" And I'm like, yeah, I didn't even think of that. So I could imagine a translation that tries to make it sound epic by using, you know, Shakespearean or King James English to any degree. And someone like my boys would just go, "What in the world are they talking about? What are all these weird words?"
when these texts were being, well, I shouldn't say texts, when these poems were being recited or written or created out of thin air, as the bards probably originally did, because this was most likely not originally written down.
Mhm.
Of course, it wasn't Like I said, it wasn't written down. So the language, I imagine, was probably contemporaneous to those listening. I don't know. And only after X amount of years did the language and the feeling of the poem, I imagine, became something that people associated with the past. So should a translation aim for what the original people listening to it had experienced at the time, which would mean, translating this ancient text into contemporaneous? Should we feel alienated, or should we feel enter the place that the people originally listened to this had felt at the time? Is what I'm trying to say. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer for that. Although generally with translations, I tend to want to go for as close to the original experience that the original audience had, and then translating that. Any
Well,
thoughts?
I mean, so it's funny because, especially because the Odyssey and the Iliad are so old, a lot of the receptions we have, like the written receptions we have about it from the Greeks, are themselves very far removed from when it was originally written down or performed orally, right? So you have the
Yeah, this was
like
ancient to the ancient Greeks.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like they thought of it as like foundational to their sense of self, and they themselves thought of it as reaching back into the heroic past, in much the same way as a lot of people now do. And the Greek philosophers had a complicated relationship with the epics, especially Socrates, who thought that Homer was essentially lying about the gods, or if he wasn't lying, then he was being very responsible with how he's telling these stories. So I think there's a lot of value in doing it kind of either way, especially because since it was oral and it was contemporaneous while it was oral and then written down, but it was written down probably at a time of great turmoil for the Greeks, so the language probably was shifting, I would imagine, pretty rapidly because the Odyssey is like a tale. So the Bronze Age collapse happened, and this is a tale of just before that, right? And then most of the writings we have are post Bronze Age collapse, when like the entire ancient world kind of fell apart.
Notably, this story has Iron Age weapons. Or is it the Iliad? I forget. I think it's this story.
I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, like so when you're going for the style, then do you elevate it? Do you make it colloquial? I think probably elevating it is generally a better bet. Wilson went for a colloquial style here. What would Homer have used? Was the ancient Greek that was being recited and then later written down elevated in the sensibilities of the people around them? I think we don't know, right? Maybe it's just a
Yeah.
case of like we don't know.
We don't even know if Homer was a real person or
Yeah,
a collection of bards.
and Wilson offers her interpretation that it was that Homer was probably like a figure, but not the only one. I think, right? Um,
There's also the question of, I mean, if we're going to use a parallel in English lit, um, you know, we know Shakespeare did not write in colloquially. I don't know what he was writing in,
Mhm.
but it wasn't everyday speech. But then you've got things like the Once and Future King or Chaucer or, the Legends of Robin Hood. And when they were first written down, do we know if that was everyday speech or was that like
We
different
don't, I'm
in how?
sure. Scholars
Philip
might.
Chase would know.
Yeah.
Because I think that would give us an insight into a pattern of how humans think when they're writing down epic stories.
Mhm. Well, I mean, one aspect of style that is like definitely not how people normally speak, but was necessary for the oral tradition is the large amounts of repetition, stylistic repetition that happen. Um,
Mhm.
the in
Epithets,
this in this,
rosy
yeah,
fingered
like
dawn.
yeah, like owl-eyed Athena, far-seeing Athena, like the Odysseus, Lord of Lies, yeah, rosy-fingered Dawn, all these repetitious things, so that the bards, as they're reciting, can catch their can think about what is going to actually happen next in the story as they're reciting, so they don't have weird
That's not just it,
pauses.
though. First, it helps them remember it. First of all, to
Hmm.
uh, if you're gonna recite a poem or anything, having some sort of rhythm or meter or repeated parts is going to help you memorize it. But it also helps them stay inside their limitations, because it was in dactylic hexameter. It needed to be a certain length and it needed to be a certain rhythm. So not only did it help them, think about what needs to come next, it helped them with a rhythm and to fit inside the and to help them memorize it.
And this would feel very artificial too.
I didn't understand the terminology when the translator was explaining all that. But what I thought it was most useful for was reminding the audience of the characteristics of who we're talking about.
Mm.
Because maybe someone just walked in, didn't know the story, and wouldn't know necessarily which attribute of which god or which of Odysseus's personalities we're talking about at the moment. And
I'm
so
sure that
that
was
would
part of it
lend it.
too, because these very, very rarely, I'm sure, were these poems told in one sitting. I imagine they were told
Mhm.
over several nights or several days, or maybe over maybe just certain parts or chapters were told at a time. So to help people in the audience understand, what part we're at, I'm sure that would be helpful as well. Uh, well,
It is. I was just thinking about the way she chose to tell the story, and where we first meet Odysseus, and he's talking. He's almost home, and he spends most of the journey talking about how he got to where he is. And I think that's the first time I've ever heard the Odyssey told in that way. It was more like the way you described one of the other versions, Sharon, where you just start at the beginning and the story is told like a novel. I'm 90% sure that's how the previous book I read had it.
Mm.
you probably weren't reading
It
a
was a,
translation then, maybe something like what Ash was reading.
yeah, I just remember it had about a dozen or maybe 20 cassettes. It was a big box of tapes.
Um, so what I want to bring is that I don't think there's any right or wrong way to translate. Well, there probably are some, but I don't think there's any wrong or right way for to approach a translation. And while I might prefer some other versions that are more high and epic and poetic, I think this was a good choice for what Wilson was going for. And I think
Mhm.
having such an important text be translated so often and having so many is a real strength because much like the ancients listened to different bards telling the story and all the bards tell the story in different ways, we get different translations. And whenever you translate, you're going to lose something in translation and you're going to gain something in translation. And the only way to experience this without having read, the original text, which I'm not going to learn ancient Greece anytime soon at least, is to get a different translation, compare and contrast with what you had before, much like the ancients did with different bards. And I think the diversity of translations is a real boon.
I agree. I think we should also probably discuss the extent to which the translator may or may not impose their worldview on the text that they're translating.
Oh, I think that's a guarantee. It's just a matter of degree.
Yeah, so like how neutral do you even attempt to be? I think Emily Wilson like she takes like kind of a soft stance in favor of like she doesn't retell it necessarily, but the way she's telling the story is definitely in reaction to older translators.
Mhm.
And like she's definitely bringing more of a feminist spin on it than has historically been applied to the Odyssey. Now, so I think especially for this one, like it leads you to feel kind of ambivalent a lot of the time towards Odysseus. I think the language describing women was softened. If I remember correctly, a lot of the older translations refer to them as whores and sluts a lot more. I don't think she does. And then
B
like
word.
yeah, and several specific word choices she uses are like they're like kind or more ambiguous in some cases and less ambiguous in others, which I think is
Mhm.
interesting. So like she starts out by calling Odysseus complicated, the complicated man. A different translation says ingenious hero, right?
Mhm.
Is her translation close to the ancient Greek? I have no idea. Like apparently the original word was many turning man, which
Mhm.
like you can obviously use a bunch of different words to describe that, but yeah, like I think when it comes to doing a translation like this, if even if you're consciously imposing your own worldview to some extent, it's still important to try and be sympathetic to the way that people would have viewed things contemporaneously, like here and said, while also making sure that people in the present don't misunderstand. So she uses the word slave a lot.
Mhm.
When, if I recall correctly, it's that word is not used very often in other translations, even though like it's literally descriptive in this case. Like the Greeks had a lot of slaves, especially like Sparta was like a slave society with like
Yeah.
90% of their population. being enslaved.
Well,
But a lot of people
one
miss
thing I've
this.
noticed, I listen to a ton of history podcasts, and one thing I've noticed is that people are more or less willing to use the word slave or talk about the slave culture depending on the culture under discussion. If
Yeah.
we're talking ancient Greeks, Romans, or Western Europe, there's never any qualms. It's almost emphasized. But almost any other part of the world, it's almost intentionally de-emphasized.
Hmm.
And it's like, that's an odd choice, but okay. And we're talking different people, different podcasters. I think it's just a phase in history where we are right now,
I agree.
at least
I
in the English speaking world.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because I was about to bring it up. That was a perfect segue to talk about specifically her use of slave instead of thing. So I think she got a slight flack for it. It's maybe a little bit of a controversy, but I think if you choose to use slave, you are obviously missing out on some of the other, like what kind of slave are they, for example.
Mhm.
Whereas the other
Mhm.
translations would say, okay, this one's a maid, this one's a cook. But when they use those words, the other translations, you miss on the fact that they're a slave.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not perfect,
Well,
and
that's also a
never will be.
defect of American thinking. Is we tend to, when someone says slave, we tend to
Yeah.
default to Southern field hand, and it's
Mm.
like that is one very small aspect of a human institution that has existed in every culture throughout all of world history. Yeah.
Yes. Slavery is something that it's less common now. It's not abolished, and certainly not in a lot of countries.
Well, at least
But
there are countries where it's no longer legal. Let's put it
yes,
that way.
but yeah, like it was for the vast majority of human history, people didn't see a problem with forcing
Mhm.
other people to work for them for no pay.
No. In
Right?
fact, it's funny because Aristotle gets a lot of flack for coming up with a moral justification for slavery.
Mm.
He, if I remember correctly, he believes that some people are born, that everyone is born to their station, and those who are slaves are born to the station of slavery.
Yeah, some people are just more
But
slavey than others.
yeah, exactly. Which is an interesting view on predestination, but okay. Um, but then I was annoyed because I that other philosophers who lived in slave cultures, many of them far more brutal than Aristotle's Greece, never mentioned slavery at all. It's almost as if, why would I discuss it? It's just the way things are, is the way I take their silence. So they were so used to it, they didn't even feel it was worthy of moral discussion or moral justification. Is my interpretation of their silence.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like everybody has always done it. It's just kind of like the fate of people who lose wars or
Mhm.
simply get unlucky or committed crimes. And it's like us like talking extensively about like I mean everything gets talked about extensively now, but
Yeah.
like about like the restaurant cultures or like
Mhm.
getting
Yeah.
paid for a living. It's like it's so part of the culture that it's often not thought about very much.
Mhm.
Do we want to stay in translation, or can I introduce a new topic?
Sure, go ahead.
I would be remiss to not talk about James Joyce. Ulysses is famously a retelling of the Odyssey, and James Joyce. Let me see if I could find the quote. He famously said that Odysseus is the only all-round character in literature, and that he is multifaceted. And you see him as a father, you see him as a slave, you see him as a beggar, you see him as a lover, etc., etc., etc. Do you think that this is true?
I feel like James Joyce might have been correct at the time. There's probably counterexamples now. I do think that he's a very well-rounded character and has like surprising depth to him.
Yeah,
Like
I think for ancient myth, that's true.
yeah, like it's not for nothing that Wilson chose a complicated man as his first descriptor, right? Like he's got a lot to him, and he plays many different roles and plays them differently.
I think it's well put.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a complicated man. I think out of all the ones that I've heard, the complicated man I think is a very maybe the best one, if especially considering my interpretation of Odysseus, because he's not a good guy. He is a hero.
Mhm.
He's not really a bad guy. He does what he needs to do. He tries to take care of those. He's very wily and liar
Mhm.
and tricksy. But yeah, he's very multifaceted. And I think James Joyce is absolutely correct maybe some more modern prose novels would
Yeah.
be able to give a more complete picture. In fact, I think Leopold Bloom may be one of those. They give a very full picture of a character. But I think Odysseus, he modeled his main character in Ulysses on Odysseus, and that's very telling.
I think it's interesting too. One thing that kind of it struck me as odd. Not in that, growing up in a let's just say a society with deep Christian heritage and roots and influence. Hearing a god praise a mortal for his incessant lying was like, wait, what? I had to double take for a second. It just was so weird.
After he bold-faced lied to that goddess.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And she's basically like, "Oh, you're such a good liar. I love you so much for it." And I'm like, "Wait, what?"
This is one of the things that Plato writes that Socrates was critical of the Odyssey for. Now, oh yeah, in some lines of this text, I think Emily Wilson is like deliberately invoking ideas that like we shouldn't see Odysseus as heroic, and in other sections she's very sympathetic to him. Like the ones that stand out to me are like they're almost satanic. She describes him as Lord of Lies, which is a word like
Mhm.
a name for the devil,
Beelzebub.
right?
Yep, I've
Yeah.
heard, yeah.
Well, no,
And then
Beelzebub is flies, but yeah,
also
yeah.
Lord of Suffering when he orders that guy to be tortured.
Mhm.
I mean, other times he's like weeping and he seems to have like a great sadness within him. He's very sympathetic. But like he's at no point can you ever pin him down and easily categorize him.
Yeah, I also one thing I loved in Emily Wilson's prologue was that what we see here is a human suffering extreme PTSD
Hmm.
from years of endless battle and suffering and losing all his friends, and but then at the same time she criticizes him for his coldness when all those people die because of his failing. And it's like she almost has a love hate relationship with him.
Um, Not to shift blame, but I don't think all of the deaths in his hands were entirely his fault. For example, the oxen of the sun, he's basically told his dudes, "Don't eat it, don't eat it,
Yeah, he tried
don't
very
eat
hard, and the wind.
the
He
win." Yeah,
Yeah.
he told them not to open it, and they did anyways. It's like,
I'm
yeah.
amazed
So
he kept sailing with them after that. You know?
um, I think I'd like to talk now about well. Let me ask you guys first. What were your favorite scenes in the book or chapters?
I think the one that stands out most to me is the sirens, what they were calling for him, what they were telling. I don't ever remember, it being I'll tell you who all your friends are and whether they're in heaven or hell and how they're doing. And I
Mm.
always remembered it being as either a hypnotic song or a promise of riches or carnal pleasures, whereas they were tempting him with knowledge of the people he had lost, and that stood out to me.
My favorite when I had first read the Odyssey was when he finds Argos, his
Oh,
dog. Yeah, and that ruined me as a kid. And it kind of still does.
yeah, me too.
That's I think the best dog scene in fiction. And then the one that stood out to me most this time was when he visited Hades and he saw all of his dead companions around him, and it was
Hmm.
just so melancholy and bleak, and it felt kind of hopeless too because like you have all these people here. They've died in horrible ways. He talks with Achilles and said, "You had a heroic death, and we mourn you." And then Achilles said, I would rather be a servant to the lowliest farmer than be dead right now. And it's like, okay, like what's waiting for Odysseus after death? Nothing good. Like the way they talk about death in this story is so despairing. Like the best that Odysseus can hope for is like that he lives a long life and it's gentle, and then after he's dead, then is anything good going to happen to him? I don't know. I don't know if they had the concept of Elysium at this point.
It seems like this episode is going. What do you guys think about this? And then Ash bringing up something I wanted to bring up because that was also my favorite part of the tale. I love his journey into the other underworld because it seems like each person that he talks to serves an important part of the story. And the Achilles, I think, was the most important because it just strengthened his resolve to do whatever it takes to be wily, to be a liar, to get back to his boring life. But I also think it kind of serves as another criticism of Achilles, which I know we just finished the Iliad, which the entire book might be seen as a criticism of Achilles. But not just Achilles, but the entire warrior ethos of glory and death. And you meet him in this tale, and he's like, "No, I don't want to be here. Like, make me a poor farmer." Also, Achilles famously dressed as a woman to try to get out of fighting in the war. So,
But he's reunited with
Uh,
Patroclus at least.
I don't think he likes it that much. I'm sure other tales of the Grecian underworld will have him and Patroclus very happy with one another, but not this tale. He met his mother. He met
Yeah. Agamemnon.
Agamemnon. He's like, I went home and I got killed. He met the famous blind prophet who told him exactly what not to do and what to do, and that didn't go well.
Tiresias.
I think it's kind of like the peak of the story, in my opinion, of like, this is what's going to happen, and this is what's going to happen to you, and this is why you want it to happen, and this is what happened to all your friends.
And this is your anxiety. This is
And
how
the
things can
melancholy
go wrong.
just works. Yep.
Yeah. It's funny. This story, I think, is a lot more sympathetic to Agamemnon. The Iliad is. Like, if you read the Iliad, it's like, why does anybody like this guy? How could anybody follow into battle? And then this one, everyone's just got nothing but praise for him, except apparently Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. I guess I'll take the time to say the Oresteia, which is the trio of plays surrounding Agamemnon's return, is really good. I would recommend it to anyone who likes this.
Seconded.
And Cassandra is the saddest character, maybe.
Cassandra sucks.
You don't like Cassandra?
No, I like Cassandra. It sucks for her.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Kirsten, nobody ever listened to you. Yet you're always right.
I think she's the saddest character in Greek mythology.
Yeah, probably.
What about the couple went to the underworld?
Orpheus?
Orpheus, yeah.
Less sad. Because Clytemnestra, sorry, not Cassandra, has no agency over her own fate. You know, she's cursed by Apollo, and then she's locked in. You know, she does her best to rail against it, and nothing works. At least Orpheus had the chance. You know.
Okay, that's a good point. But if you wanted to talk about agency, almost none of the characters that are cursed by the gods are ever their fault.
That's true. Even in this story, actually, like, you can't even give Odysseus a lot of, like, too much credit for what he does, because Athena's constantly intervening, and it's like, oh, she comes in and makes him handsome, or she comes in and deflects all the spears that the suitors are stabbing him with, or in the case of Telemachus, like, I think he does nothing essentially in the story without Athena doing it for him. Like, she makes him able to stand unafraid. Like, they're constantly intervening to change their emotions and their appearances and their capabilities, and it leaves you kind of wondering, like, how much at this point is Odysseus actually doing, and how much is it just Athena or Zeus or Poseidon messing things up or helping him?
I don't know if it's just because I just read The Color of Magic, but the board game between Luck and Fate has striking resemblance to this goings on between Athena and the other gods.
Yeah, no kidding.
I was also, when you mentioned about you don't know if the Greeks had the concept of Elysium
At the time of the story.
at the time of the story, yes. I'm going to make a wild guess, a mildly educated wild guess, and say no, because I know that at about as far as we know, Judaism definitely didn't at this time, and that concept of dualism was imported from the Persians, who came around a few hundred years or several hundred years later. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if the concept of dualism migrated into Greek culture in the form of Elysium and other, and maybe that's where we got the modern idea that Hades was evil. It's, it may have been filtered through Zoroastrianism.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting anthropological question. When exactly
I love
these
the way
beliefs became
mythologies
popular.
feed off and influence each other.
Yeah.
studying the chain of events and how they develop is quite fascinating. For a lot
Yes.
of cross fertilization.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, religion is like maybe it's one of the best examples. You see it everywhere, and I think it's really underappreciated to like just the extreme extent that people moving along and telling different stories to each other radically altered their theologies. Like in
Mhm.
like what happened in Norse theology when they just kind of added a whole separate category of gods to their pantheon because they talked with some Germanic peoples.
Yeah, well, that and I mean the fact that all the epics, the Nordic epics, were recorded by Catholic priests and monks. I'm sure did
Yeah,
no favors to you know, keeping
like
the original.
yeah, the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, written by Snorri Sturluson in Iceland, right?
I know someone who would know all those answers. He's actually a Norse pagan, but
Oh,
I have no clue.
nice. Yeah, yeah, and then you get all these concepts of just like sacrifice and apocalypse that seem pretty similar to a lot of Christian ideas, and it's kind of unclear
Uh-huh.
where they come from.
Occasionally, he'll go on a rant about how everything we know about the Norse gods is wrong, and his brother's just like, "Don't get him started."
Yeah, no kidding.
Homer spoke of the Elysian Fields.
Mm,
I believe he even said that Patroclus was there.
Hmm.
okay,
And then like
well, that's
what
definitely
exactly
interesting.
does this mean? It's probably different based on the time period you're using, and I mean there is in this book there is the concept of getting judged, and the judge in this case is King Midas, right? So like what are you
Well,
getting
I
judged
mean, if
for?
we're going to talk about what does a name for a section of the afterlife mean, it's like it really depends on who you're talking to and what decade, what denomination, what sect. The same name can be used to represent very different places depending
Yes.
on when and where it's being talked about. Just ask modern your average Protestant American Christian today, say versus Dante, about what's hell.
Yeah.
They come up with very different answers.
Ask a first century Christian and you'll have a radically different answer than
Oh, I'm
anything you
sure.
find today. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found it. But Menelaus, it is not your fate to die in Argos. Gods will carry you off to the world's end, to Elysium. Those fields are ruled by tawny Rhadamanthus, and life is there the easiest for humans. There is no snow, no heavy storms or rain, but ocean always sends up gentle breezes of zephyr to refresh the people there.
Okay. So it's very much like an Eden type place. I mean, Eden's described that way in Genesis.
Certainly better than the rest of Hades.
Yeah, no
It's
kidding.
interesting that Menelaus gets this fate too. Given that, as like from everything we know of Menelaus, it's not like he was like very ethical guy, right? This is just because he fears the gods, right? Like he does sacrifices to them, honors
Hmm.
them, which I get. Like it seems to be most of what matters to these
Yeah.
guys.
Well, we see Athena say that over and over. That one of the main reasons she favors Odysseus is that he never forgets to sacrifice.
Hmm. And it's extremely transactional. You know, like you sacrifice, you get the god's favor, unless they're angry about something else, and then you can perform this ritual, perhaps to regain their favor, which is very different from how we think about it in any kind of moral terms,
Yeah.
especially after post Christianity.
Hmm. Well, it also comes down to that question. Do the gods like a thing because it's moral, or is it moral because the gods like it?
I think
Yeah.
definitely in this tale it's the latter, although I do have a counterexample. And I think that's a good way to segue to my next point. A lot of this tale, I think, can be seen through the lens of moralizing to the audience in terms of the virtue of xeniality, because it seems like a lot
Definition.
of these xenial, being kind to foreigners or to guests,
Okay.
the importance of the guest-host relationship.
Yes.
Mm.
Um,
Yes. Absolutely.
what they say that Zeus really cares about this, but like from the perspective of Zeus, why should he care? And I don't think Zeus well, it doesn't really matter. But I think this actually was very, very important to the Greeks, which is why it came up into the story a lot.
Well, no, I mean, guest right and kindness to strangers is extremely important in almost every ancient culture. In the U.S., we tend to forget about it. But you go to Asia, you go to the Middle East. I have no idea about Africa, but it's a massive part of just the ascent. Guest right is still a thing today in many parts of the world, and it was huge in ancient times.
So the reason I brought this up was it seems. Do you think that the slaughter at the end was
Mm.
a slaughter of guests by an unwilling host. Thoughts?
It feels like a loophole.
God let me do it.
Well, no, not just God let him do it, but he never granted them guest right in his home.
Yeah, that's fair.
Well, they were also like so to the extent that they would have guest rights, they radically abused it, right?
Yes.
And the concepts of hospitality only work if people aren't going to abuse them.
Mhm.
And yeah, like all of the stories of Odysseus on his journey, probably can be framed in terms of guest right, maybe with like a couple exceptions like Scylla and Charybdis.
Yeah, almost
Cersei
every
abuses
single
guest
one.
right. Yeah.
He was a very, very bad guest to Cyclops, but Cyclops also wasn't very kind to him and his crew.
I mean,
Well, I
I
even
was.
heard.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Polyphemus, not Cyclops.
I even heard one interpretation of the biblical Sodom and Gomorrah as a violation of guest right story. That the whole plague happened, that the destruction happened not because of anything people were doing in the bedrooms. It was because they had violated the cities had violated guest right, and that's why they
A-
were destroyed.
And the guests were heavenly guests.
Yes, exactly. They they
In
they were
disguise.
they were rude to the gods who came as guests.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think you got it on the nail on the head. Yeah, the important part is the transact. Not, I don't think transactional is right, but like the fact is that the guests violated the guest host relationship in many ways.
Oh yeah, that's emphasized at least in this translation.
Hmm.
Yeah, and you even hear it among the guests talking to each other, and one of them is like, "Well, I don't care," and it's like, "Wait, what?"
May Zeus smite me. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he does.
um, do we talk about the role of women in this story?
No, I don't think we should talk about women.
Of course, of course you don't. I'm going to bring it up as an ally. So something before I'd read the Odyssey, or before I'd recently read it, I guess, because I'd read it years and years ago in high school. Something famous about ancient Greece is it's just blatant misogyny. So
Oh yeah.
in reading and rereading the Odyssey, I'm always surprised by the women and how competent they are and how powerful they are. And how much agency they seem to have in the stories that are largely written by a very misogynistic culture, or consumed by a misogynistic culture. Because I imagine ancient Greece was quite a bit different culturally than ancient Greece, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yeah,
Any thoughts on that?
although I think viewing ancient Greece through the modern misogynistic lens or definition of misogyny is unfair because you had from what I gather from I've never studied ancient Greece, but from what I've gathered from what little I bits and pieces is that tasks and responsibilities were divided. And so men took care of this, this, and this, women took care of this, this, and this. And within their appropriate domains, there was kind of women weren't ever in charge, I don't think, but it's like they had the mastery of competence. So if the woman said the olives need to be pressed this way, it would be stupid for the man not to listen, almost like in a lieutenant with his NCO type situation. And that I mean that's the only time I actually got really annoyed with the way women were depicted here was that repeatedly, especially the slave women or women of lower status, or even one of the wives, is depicted as being loyal to the last guy whose bed she. And I was just like, oh my god, somebody knew absolutely nothing about women when they wrote this. But that's my 2 cents on that.
I think it's perfectly fair to label ancient Greece as sexist because their
Oh
uh,
yeah,
attitudes toward women were incredibly sexist. For example, double standards as far as men and women's sexual proclivities meant women were expected to be chaste, and men would and could sleep with everyone that they wanted.
Mhm.
Women could not inherit
But that's a
property.
universal truth before modern birth control. That's just how every society was.
It's not true. There are plenty of ancient cultures that were matrilineal, or
But
ancient
but
pagan.
were the women viewed as promiscuous, or was it used as a test of fertility? Because I've read about cultures where women slept around until they became pregnant, but after that they were paired off with a man, even in matrilineal societies.
I know in ancient Heian, Japan, for example, women and men were both very promiscuous even after marriage, and that
I'd never
actually
heard of that one.
before the import of Confucianism from the Chinese continent, Japan was largely, I'm not going to say completely, but largely I don't say matrilineal. What's the point? Let's just say it was there is a lot more equal than it was after the import of Confucianism. Himiko, the ancient princess of Yamataikoku, it was ran by a woman who was a seer and a magician. So, I mean, it's not true that all ancient cultures were sexist to some point. Women didn't have voting rights.
Well, yeah.
The general idea that women provided nothing in terms of reproduction, for example. I think what was the tale where Athena came and she said, "Oh, it was from the Oresteia, right?" Where Athena was at
It might
the
have been,
trial, and
yeah.
she's like, "Yeah, she was at the trial, and like, I was actually born of man because women don't actually do anything; they just carry the baby. I was born from my father."
Father Zeus. I mean, in Athena's case, it's literally true.
Yeah, in
Um,
that case, it's true. But I think the idea is from the author is that yeah, this is just accepted as
Huh,
truth in our society.
I missed that
um,
one. That is an interesting take.
yeah, I think when it comes to discussions of sexism and misogyny, like I think it'd be fair to say that our current culture is a lot better in this respect than ancient cultures, and part of this is technologically enabled, and part of this is I do think societies have gotten more ethical broadly. Um, but it's always a more complicated discussion than is commonly understood.
Mhm.
Like women have
Well, I mean,
always been important in history. There have always
yes.
been women that have been there, even if they're not necessarily acknowledged, that have swayed the fortunes of empires and religions. One example I'm thinking of right now is uh, Theodora, Justinian's wife,
Mhm.
who the Eastern Roman Empire. They kind of ruled it together, and they both had immense impacts on how it went, even though
Yeah.
she definitely didn't come from any kind of privileged background, and was in fact a very famous prostitute for a number of years. When it comes to
And
the
depending
Odyssey,
on which of his histories you read, the secret or the official, her
yeah,
personality changes drastically.
yes, you can tell that. I forget what his name was, but the
Yeah, I
historian
can't
at the
remember
time
either.
did not like her.
No.
When it comes to the women in the Odyssey, I think it's kind of an interesting story, and Emily Wilson probably has had a pretty positive impact on the translation here, because they don't have a huge role,
Mhm.
barring Athena, who has maybe the largest role. Is obviously female, is by far the most active god. You have Penelope, who I think is a very multi-layered character, and who you can read a lot into. And I actually
There's also
kind of
Circe and Calypso.
yeah, that's true. Calypso, kind of a horn dog, a lonely horn dog. And then I actually quite liked Helen in this as well. I wasn't expecting to. It's she at this point in the story, Helen's come back and she's, I guess, happy or pretending to be happy with Menelaus. She blames the fact that she eloped with Paris on Aphrodite, influencing her, which may very well be the truth.
I think it
It's
depends on
kind
the
of ambiguous.
teller of the tale.
Yeah. And she's kind and she seems insightful and she has good advice for Telemachus, and I think is portrayed more sympathetically than Menelaus for the most part. Although Menelaus is also kind of portrayed sympathetically. I think I think it would be a mistake to say that like the slant towards women is decidedly negative, at least in this translation. And maybe in the original Greek. I don't know.
Great. I don't really have much else to talk about. Do you want to talk about the upcoming adaptation at all?
The Christopher Nolan?
I haven't seen it.
It's not out yet. It comes out next week.
Oh, oh, okay. All I know about it are some of the scandal around certain real and or rumored casting choices.
The extent to which the internet has gone crazy just with wild
Yes,
speculations around cast, I think is very, very typical and kind of like
it's very
hilariously
typical of our
misguided.
decade.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
there will be all of human history to get angry about it after you know what it is.
Yeah.
I've very purposely tried to avoid such discussions because I just do not care. But I'm very, very excited.
Well, if Achilles ends up being played by a slender, short person, below average stature person, I'm going to be annoyed. I every time I close my eyes, Achilles is Brad Pitt. Sorry.
I yeah, like I think that Elliot Page's Achilles would be pretty dramatic miscast. Yeah, they're just better candidates for the greatest warrior ever. The extent to which we've kind of looked back on movies that were critically panned, like Troy, is also kind of funny to me. Like it's totally fine to find those films fun
Mhm.
and whatnot, but like some of the dialogue, it pretends that they were like bastions of historical accuracy or whatever, and that is just very amusing to me.
Yeah.
Because
Well, you also just can't judge movies by their immediate response. There's so many examples of movies that bombed in the theaters and end up
that's true.
becoming major classics. And then we have movies like 300 that were super successes, and now most people are like, you know.
300 is interesting because I like 300. It's a ridiculous movie.
Oh
It's
yeah, I enjoy it as a comedy,
mhm.
especially after the spoof.
It's
You
funny
know.
how much of it is like and by how much I mean like any at all is actually just taken from the accounts of Herodotus, like to the extent that like individual lines of dialogue were lifted. Obviously this
Oh,
is
that's pretty
it's an
cool. I didn't know
adaptation of
that.
yeah, like the "We will fight in the shade" is
Uh,
as far as I know Herodotus.
I know that every Persian YouTuber or podcaster I've heard, and every historian who's talking about the history, it's almost an obligatory to spend a huge segment of time dissing that movie.
That's totally fair too. Like like the Spartans were not the heroic defenders of liberty. The Persians were not this evil empire.
No, it's like the
The
Spartans but almost never showed up to fight anybody. It's like, what? No
yeah.
wonder they lost.
Hey, I think it looks really cool, and I love the way Xerxes looks.
Yeah,
Oh,
no,
oh
and yeah,
God.
despite all of this, I love the movie. I have a
I do too.
great deal of fun
No,
watching it.
even when
It's
the
like
movie came out, I could not handle the way Xerxes looked. I'm like, he looks like he's from central or southern India.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, I'm certain there's a lot of Orientalism involved in, but that's also true to the Spartans and the way they viewed the Orient. And
yes.
what year was it? What year did it take place?
Oh boy, I don't remember.
Oh, um, nope,
But the
don't remember.
Spartans, I mean,
It
I
was
don't know about the
some hundreds
Spartans
years BC.
specifically,
Okay,
but the
so
Greeks had a lot of content.
earlier y'all talked about Achilles. Elliot Page is not playing Achilles; he's playing Sinon.
Yeah, that's what I had
Oh.
heard, and that seemed like a much more appropriate casting. I think like if that's correct, I think it's just a good choice.
Oh,
I
I do
think
have one
people
little thing
freak
before
out
we
too much about
go.
casting. Go ahead.
There were several words or phrases or titles that I began to wonder if, like in Shakespeare, these words, like what predated what, like mentor. Was the name mentor given because Athena's character was a mentor, or did the word mentor, come to mean mentor because that was the role Athena's character was playing when it used that name?
I think the
That's a
latter.
good
I think
question.
the for the most part the names are kind of directly translated. Like I like Heracles, for example, I think is the same in ancient Greek as it is in English. Achilles, Odysseus.
And there were a couple of those, but Mentor's the only one I can remember.
There, yeah,
I was like,
I
huh.
saw a few shared character names like Laertes is in Hamlet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems mentor actually comes from mentor in the Odyssey.
Here we go.
It's,
Nice.
Okay,
the English took it from the French, and the French, I guess, used it from this story.
interesting.
Neat. All right.
Yeah.
Finally, did y'all enjoy this?
Oh
Yes.
yeah. No, I was actually asked about 5 or 6 years ago by my son's girlfriend what my famous Odyssey story was, and I'm not my favorite fantasy book was, and I said the Odyssey off the top of my head.
Hmm.
Got a really weird look and was asked why, and I'm like, well, because the Odyssey is in Western culture, at least, it is the seed from which all fantasy grew.
The
And that,
Urtext.
I may not be technically correct, but that's how I view it.
Um, I'm not going to push back too hard.
Yeah, there's like quibbles you could launch, like the Epic of Gilgamesh or whatever, but like no, I think it's like definitely true that when it comes to the Western canon, the Iliad and the Odyssey have had more impact and earlier impact than basically anything else.
Mhm.
The Bible is a contender, I think, in terms of importance.
Yeah. Now, for the Bible, I will give you the Epic of Gilgamesh, but for Western epic fantasy, it's more. I think the Odyssey has had a lot more influence.
And it's funny too, because one of the classic criticisms of fantasy is that it kind of glorifies adventure, and like there's been like a real response to the swashbuckling nature of it, obviously. And the Odyssey itself, I think, is deeply ambivalent over the nature of adventure, right? Like Odysseus does collect all this loot. He does go and kill monsters and whatnot, but it's
He
not
says,
portrayed in like this D&D-esque way where this is just like uncomplicatedly like a good fun thing. For the most part, he's miserable throughout the entire book, and like talking about how like this is the fate of like one who is like most cursed by the gods.
Mhm.
And then you can have like, I think, really interesting conversations about the nature of heroism and like the moral ambiguity of like everything that he's going through and the things that he's doing and the role that the gods play in his life, and to what extent they can be seen as ethical at all.
But it's still very much a hero's journey.
It's
yeah,
yeah, and it's heroic in like the Greek sense of Odysseus has heroic qualities that he's like a
Right.
paragon in, not
Well, I
necessarily
was
that he's
thinking
a
of the
moral
Joseph
paragon, right?
Campbell sense, but yeah.
Oh, yes, also, yes. Joseph Campbell, I think, famously used the Odyssey as one of his models for the
Uh,
hero's journey, right? Or
I
his concept of the
I
hero of a
didn't
thousand
remember
faces.
that. I've read a couple of his books, so I probably should have. But
I read the Hero of the
I,
Thousand Faces recently, and I actually liked it a lot more than I thought. I thought it had a lot of good insight to it that people miss
yeah.
when they talk about it.
At the time I read Hero of a Thousand Faces, I was obsessing over the Star Wars references. So
Yeah, Star Wars, a funny example because it just like kind of directly took what Campbell wrote and was like, "Hey, this is a good model for a story."
uh-huh.
I got a question. Do you think there's anything to the idea that Odysseus made up most of his journey?
No, boo, that sucks.
No, I don't like that.
Why?
It's boring. It makes the story
Yeah,
less
it's boring.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah. No technical reason. I just don't like it.
Um, I agree. I don't like it. I very much prefer that the story would be real, but I mean, we're reading a story that probably isn't real, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it fits with good storytelling. I think if that were to have come out, like, I think it'd be about as successful as everybody realizing the post plane crash was a dream and they're all dead. It's like, what the hell?
Also, contemporaneous like listeners to the story wouldn't have thought of it as ridiculous, right?
No.
But that Odysseus, the wily liar, made up the whole thing.
That Odysseus on his journey encountered many creatures that seem fantastical, but
Yeah.
which like many of them probably believed actually existed. They certainly
I
believed in
think
the
that,
gods, right?
yeah.
That's not what I mean. I
As a
just mean like,
literary as a literary criticism, I think it's valid because Odysseus is such a liar. But as a good story, it falls flat.
Yeah, you can certainly have the interpretation and then try to extract value from it. I think the value you extract will be pretty limited.
I agree completely. I think it's a perfectly valid interpretation considering what he gets from the Phaeacians. I mean, it's in his interest to lie and make up this story that will make people sympathize him and help him get home, and that's exactly what happens. But like you said, there's very little value in reading it that way, and I mean, it's fine. It's not
Yeah, it's just
offensive,
not
I think.
fun.
Yeah.
Half the story's gone.
It contributes to his character, I suppose. My final question: are you going to read the other books in the series?
Whenever Homer publishes next, I'm there.
Yeah.
I may go back over the Iliad because I also haven't read that in many many years. So
Well,
I might.
I'm waiting for Telogeny, the eighth book in the epic cycle, to come out. One of my favorite things I read about the Odyssey was that Homer didn't even want the adaptation to come out.
Why did his estate sell the rights? That was the mistake.
Tisk tisk tisk.
Yeah.
All right. Shall we end here?
All right.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for listening. This has been the Green Team Legendarium podcast talking about the Odyssey. Please come and join our Discord, the Legendarium Discord. I don't know, Google it. I have been your host, Huron Fan. I have with me Seeker and Ashman. Our intro and outro music is Galactic Damages by Jingle Punks. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye. Oh, that was one of the things Red said. She was so glad that Pratchett crushed his hard drive in his will.
So that they people couldn't publish.
Yeah, we're
on
not
after his
going to
death.
get any half-baked Sherlocks or Rincewinds out of Pratchett.
Yeah, crushed with a steamroller, right?
Yeah, 'cause
Uh-huh.
even the last two published Discworld books are not to the same quality as almost all the
No.
others.
I finished the
No,
last
his-
one that he published, the Shepherd's Crown, and
Yeah.
It had some really great scenes, and then the rest just kind of felt like
it's so incoherent. And there is
Yeah.
Yeah, it
like
was very blah.
there is the foreword or an afterword saying that, like, listen, this is the best. He tried his best to finish the story, and you'll just need to fill in the gaps yourself.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like a deeply melancholy way to send off the story, but like yeah.
And yet it was still very moving, especially at the end, because like the parts that he finished, like obviously were there, but like the parts that he did were really good.
Yes.
The Shepherd's Crown is one of the Tiffany Aching books, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's the last one.
Yeah.
Which all of them are very good.
Yeah.
Might be my favorite
I
YA
love
series, actually.
the wee folk, the wee Freeman,
Wee
wee
Freeman.
free.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Very fun.
Not that I can say that past 3 times.
Yeah.